They drained everything from you. They exhausted your soul. They pushed you to the limit. They stole your energy, mocked your pain, and believed they had control over you. To them, you were always there, always present, always accessible, always ready to help. They never stopped to consider what would happen if one day you simply disappeared. And then it happened. Now that you're gone, they are collapsing, confused, lost, wondering how this could be possible. How could the one who endured everything, the one who never complained, the one who always sacrificed, just vanish without warning? They weren't prepared for this. They believed they would always have more time, more chances, more control. But now, the game has changed. They never thought you would open your eyes, never imagined you would see the truth, that one day you would wake up and realize that you were never truly loved, only used, that your loyalty was never returned, only taken advantage of, that your patience was never appreciated, only tested until the breaking point. And the worst part? They knew it all along, but they pretended not to see it. Now, without you, the silence is louder than any words they could ever say. They feel the absence, but not because they truly miss you. What they really miss is what you did for them, and that realization is destroying them. Do you see how the story was always unfair? They had the chance to value you while you were still there, but they chose not to. They chose to ignore it. They chose to believe that no matter what they did, you would always be there, that you would always forgive, always try one more time, always come back. But this time, something changed. This time, there was no goodbye. No argument, no fight, no explanation. Just silence. A silence that now weighs on them like a sentence. A silence that cannot be ignored because it carries a truth they never wanted to face. They are desperate, searching for answers, but it's already too late. And now, while they struggle to understand what happened, you already know the truth. They never truly valued you until they lost you forever. Stay with me until the end, because this story might be exactly your own. You need to understand what really happens when a chosen one disappears. And more than that, you need to know what happens when a chosen one opens their eyes. Just wait and see. They thought you would always be there, that you would always understand, always forgive, always endure. And that's why they never cared enough to truly see you. They never paid attention to the details, to the weight on your shoulders, the exhaustion in your eyes, the way you tried to hold everything together while you were falling apart inside. You gave love, but never received the same in return. You listened, but no one ever listened to you. You helped heal wounds that no one even noticed you were carrying too. And still you kept going, because deep down you believed that maybe one day they would finally see. But they never did. They thought your strength was infinite, that they could test you endlessly and you would still remain, always accessible, always reliable, always available. The truth is, the presence of a chosen one is so constant that people stop questioning it. You were the one who solved problems, but no one ever asked who solved yours. You were the foundation holding everything together, but no one ever stopped to see if you also needed support. You gave without limits, and they only received, never imagining that one day what seemed certain could simply disappear. And then it happened. But before disappearing, you tested them. You stopped replying so quickly, stopped rushing to save the day, waited to see if anyone would notice, but no one did. That was the moment when the truth became clear. They didn't just fail to see you, they used you. And all along, they acted as if they were doing you a favor by accepting your help. You were always the first to show up, the first to say yes, the first to solve problems that weren't even yours. But the moment you needed something, no one was there. And that's when you decided to walk away. At first, they didn't even notice, because you had always been there, and in their minds, you always would be. But over time, they started to sense something was different. Your gaze was no longer the same. Your patience was no longer infinite. Your silence was no longer resignation. It was exhaustion. And one day, without warning, without fanfare, without arguments, you stopped being present. That's when the truth began to hurt. Because now, they look around and realize that what once seemed certain simply no longer exists. Suddenly, things started going wrong. Small problems that were once effortlessly solved now seemed impossible to handle. The balance that existed vanished. Conversations lost their depth. Situations felt heavier. The atmosphere grew colder. They try to remember the last time you genuinely smiled. They try to recall if at any moment they ever asked if you were okay. But it's already too late. And now, as they search for explanations, a haunting thought begins to creep in. If you never complained, if you never asked for anything, if you never showed how tired you really were, how long had you already left before actually walking away? And if you think that was the worst part, just wait until you see what happened next. There was a day, a specific moment. Maybe it was a conversation, a careless word, a look of indifference, or just silence. Something small, almost imperceptible, but enough to make you see everything clearly. It was like the blindfold fell from your eyes. Like for the first time you were truly seeing the truth. You realized you weren't loved, you were just convenient. And still you kept going. Because deep down you believed that maybe one day they would finally see. But they never did. They thought your strength was infinite, that they could test you endlessly and you would still remain. Always accessible, always reliable, always available. The truth is, the presence of a chosen one is so constant that people stop questioning it. You were the one who solved problems, but no one ever asked who solved yours. You were the foundation holding everything together, but no one ever stopped to see if you also needed support. You gave without limits, and they only received, never imagining that one day what seemed certain could simply disappear. And then it happened. But before disappearing, you tested them. You stopped replying so quickly, stopped rushing to save the day, waited to see if anyone would notice, but no one did. That was the moment when the truth became clear. They didn't just fail to see you, they used you. And all along, they acted as if they were doing you a favor by accepting your help. You were always the first to show up, the first to say yes, the first to solve problems that weren't even yours. But the moment you needed something, no one was there. And that's when you decided to walk away. At first, they didn't even notice, because you had always been there, and in their minds, you always would be. But over time, they started to sense something was different. Your gaze was no longer the same. Your patience was no longer infinite. Your silence was no longer resignation. It was exhaustion. And one day, without warning, without fanfare, without arguments, you stopped being present. That's when the truth began to hurt. Because now, they look around and realize that what once seemed certain simply no longer exists. Suddenly, things started going wrong. Small problems that were once effortlessly solved now seemed impossible to handle. The balance that existed vanished. Conversations lost their depth. Situations felt heavier. The atmosphere grew colder. They try to remember the last time you genuinely smiled. They try to recall if at any moment they ever asked if you were okay. But it's already too late. And now, as they search for explanations, a haunting thought begins to creep in. If you never complained, if you never asked for anything, if you never showed how tired you really were, how long had you already left before actually walking away? And if you think that was the worst part, just wait until you see what happened next. There was a day, a specific moment. Maybe it was a conversation, a careless word, a look of indifference, or just silence. Something small, almost imperceptible, but enough to make you see everything clearly. It was like the blindfold fell from your eyes. Like for the first time you were truly seeing the truth. You realized you weren't loved, you were just convenient. And suddenly, all the memories started rearranging themselves in your mind. Small details that once seemed insignificant now screamed the truth. You remembered the times you helped without hesitation, but when you needed something, all you found were excuses and absence. The promises that were never kept, the empty words with no action behind them. The times you swallowed your own suffering just to keep the peace. It was like watching a movie where suddenly you realize you were never the main character. You were just a supporting role in someone else's story. And then the question hit you. If I disappeared, would they really miss me? Or would they just miss what I did for them? And the answer struck like a sharp blow. They didn't just ignore you, they used you. That's when you realized you had spent years carrying people who never once lifted a finger for you. You replayed every moment, every attempt, every hope that maybe this time they would finally see you. But they never did. And in that moment, something inside you broke. The illusion that kept you tied to them crumbled. The bond that made you believe that if you just tried a little harder, things would be different, dissolved. And at the same time, something broke. Something inside you awakened. You felt a weight lift off your shoulders, but at the same time, a deep sadness took over, as if something inside you was dying. In the days that followed, you realized something was different. You stopped justifying the lack of reciprocity, stopped making excuses for others, started accepting that some people were only there out of convenience. You tested them, you replied to fewer messages, stopped rushing to save the day, observed in silence. And that's when you saw the truth. They didn't care. They only missed your usefulness. They didn't ask if something was wrong, didn't notice the change in your gaze. They only complained about your absence. They didn't miss you, they missed what you did for them. That's when you knew. You didn't make a scene, you didn't yell, you didn't demand explanations, you simply stopped being there. And they only realized it when it was already too late. At first, everything seemed the same. To them you were still there, even though your mind had left long ago. But then, one by one, they began to feel the weight of your absence. Small things that had always been magically resolved now became impossible problems. Gradually, the issues started piling up. They missed you, but not as a person, only as a solution. The environment around them began to shift. Suddenly, conversations felt empty. Interactions lost their flow. Problems that were once ignored started to grow because the one who had always fixed everything was no longer there. And that's when they felt the silence. Their silence, once insignificant, now became deafening. And within that emptiness, you found your answer. In the first few days, you waited for them to notice, to come after you. But when you realized nothing changed, what once was pain turned into freedom. Because, in the end, you never needed them. And they always needed you. And if you think that was the worst part, just wait until you see what happened next. You didn't beg, you didn't scream, you didn't ask for explanations, you just went silent. And that was the moment they panicked. Because the absence of a chosen one is not just an empty space, it's a collapse. At first, they tried to pretend nothing had changed. They continued their routines, their empty conversations, their mind games. But something was different. The air felt heavier. The energy no longer flowed the same way. And then, one by one, they started realizing what they had lost. Things began to go wrong. Problems that used to be effortlessly solved now seemed to multiply like a plague. Small details that never mattered before suddenly became unbearable. The chaos that had always existed, but that you had silently managed, was now undeniable. Because, after all, it was you who made everything seem easy. And now that you're gone, they don't know what to do. They try to convince themselves that your absence doesn't matter. They try to fill the void with distractions, but the discomfort remains. Because the problem was never that you were there. The problem is that now, you're not. They started noticing cracks in the system. The things that had always fallen into place effortlessly now seemed to be crumbling one by one. The small cracks turned into unbearable problems. The arguments increased. What once flowed easily now felt heavy and suffocating. And then came the silence. A discomforting silence. A silence that forced them to think. At first they laughed. Then they tried to ignore it. But soon, they realized something was wrong. The balance had been broken. And when they finally understood that you were truly gone, the fear set in. They knew that if you had left in anger, there would still be a way to manipulate you. If you had screamed, begged, or tried one last time, it would mean there was still a bond to exploit. But you didn't give them that chance. You simply disappeared. And that's what destroys them. Because now there's nothing left to fix. The silence is final. The silence is absolute. The silence of the chosen one was not emptiness. It was a silent scream that said everything that needed to be said. They tried everything. First, they ignored it. Then, they tried to make you feel guilty. Next, they mocked you, acting as if your absence was an overreaction. But when they realized none of that worked, the tone changed. The messages started arriving, at first subtle, then desperate. But it was too late. The invitations they once ignored were now sent with urgency. The questions appeared out of nowhere. How are you? You've disappeared. But you knew the truth. They didn't want to know how you were. They wanted to know how to get back what they had lost. And that's when reality hit them. They never truly missed you, only what you did for them. But now, the game had changed. They weren't just dealing with your absence. They were being forced to face the worst company possible, themselves. Because the silence wasn't just emptiness, it was a mirror. And if I told you this was only the beginning, at first they thought you'd come back, that it was just a phase, that you were being too sensitive, that soon you'd realize your mistake and return, just like always. But the days passed, the weeks passed, and you didn't come back. At first they ignored it, laughed saying you were just seeking attention. But little by little, the laughter faded into discomfort. Something was wrong. Something was missing. The balance had been broken. And that was the moment the illusion crumbled. Now they know the truth. They lost you. Not because you wanted revenge. Not because you needed to prove a point. But because, for the first time, you realized something you had always ignored. No one there had ever truly been with you. And now they are trapped in a silent nightmare. Every corner, every routine, every little detail that once went unnoticed now carries a weight that cannot be eased. They try to move on, but everything feels wrong. Conversations no longer flow like before. Gatherings feel strange, uncomfortable, filled with empty spaces no one knows how to fill. They try to ignore it, but every time they cross that empty space, they feel something unsettling. As if the air is colder, as if something is missing, because it is. Breakfast no longer carries the same lightness. The end of the day drags on. Small moments that once seemed insignificant now feel unbearable. They wake up and check their phone. No notifications. The day begins, but nothing seems to have meaning. Time moves slower, and the silence has become deafening. And then the desperation sets in. They start to realize something terrifying. There is no one to replace you. They try to convince themselves that they can find someone new. But each attempt only reinforces what they refuse to admit. What was lost will never be recovered. The new friend doesn't have your patience. The new person doesn't withstand the pressure you endured. They start to realize that no one else is willing to tolerate them the way you did. And then, the pain they inflicted on you begins to consume them. They start to feel exactly what they once made you feel. The weight of indifference, the emptiness of absence, the silence that no longer brings comfort, the scent in the air, the way the days seem grayer, the feeling that something essential has been ripped away forever. They try to go back in time. They try to remember the last conversation, the last exchange of words, the last chance they had to do things differently. But it's already too late. They created this emptiness. They destroyed the only person who truly mattered. They try to escape this realization, but the truth follows them everywhere. And then the cycle of regret begins. They find themselves reliving the past, thinking about what they could have done differently. But time cannot be rewritten. Every night, they lay their heads on the pillow, and the same question lingers. Why didn't I appreciate them when I had the chance? But the answer never comes. They try to move forward, but the past haunts them. Every moment is a reminder of what they had and lost forever. They try to ignore it, but the echo of what was destroyed keeps haunting their minds. And then comes the moment they face the harshest truth of all. There is no forgiveness for what they did. Life moved on, but they remain trapped in eternal regret. They cannot turn back time. They cannot undo their choices. All that remains is to live with the consequences. And then comes the most brutal truth of all. There is no redemption, no second chances, only the eternal emptiness of what will never return. But what if I told you, this still isn't the end? For so long, they believed they had control over you. For so long, they made you believe that without them, you were nothing. But now, the truth is undeniable. You moved on, and they stayed behind. Time passed and you grew. You became stronger. You rebuilt your life without their shadow. And the most shocking part? You don't miss them. Not even a little. The peace that once seemed impossible is now your reality. You wake up feeling light, without fear, without guilt. What was once pain is now growth. The days flow without weight, without pressure, without that constant feeling of carrying the world on your shoulders for people who would never do the same for you. You realize how long you were deceived. The love, the loyalty, the concern, none of it was real. You were just a resource, an emotional support, an endless supply of energy they drained without hesitation. And now, without you, their world has collapsed. They try to move on. They try to surround themselves with new people, but something always feels off. Nothing fills the space you left behind. The new friendships are superficial. The connections are empty. They laugh, but the laughter isn't real. They distract themselves, but their minds are always restless. Because deep down they know they lost the only person who truly mattered. And now, the question that haunts them every single day is, how did they not realize that you were the only real thing they had? But time doesn't rewind. The choices have been made, and now they have to face the harshest truth of all. While you are living your best phase, they are trapped in a cycle of regret and loss. Time moves forward, but for them, everything stays the same. They haven't grown, they haven't evolved, they haven't learned anything. They are stuck in the same place, reliving the same mistake, haunted by the ghost of what they destroyed. Meanwhile, you look back and feel nothing. No anger, no resentment, no longing. Looking back, you see it clearly. The version of you that accepted crumbs is gone. In its place, someone unbreakable was born. You no longer need anyone's approval. You no longer feel the need to prove yourself to be accepted, because now you know exactly who you are. And them? They try to form new connections, but something is always missing. The spark isn't the same. The words don't carry the same weight. Because the truth is simple. You were irreplaceable. Now you understand that you never lost anything. The real loss would have been staying there. Your silence was your greatest victory. Years go by, but the weight of their loss doesn't lessen. They try to move on, but the absence of the chosen one is an emptiness they will never be able to fill. They pretend they've moved forward, but deep down, they know the truth. They are prisoners of a past that can never be rewritten. For the first time, you taste true freedom. You don't need anyone, and that is the most powerful feeling you've ever experienced. You have become what they feared the most. Someone who can no longer be manipulated, controlled, or influenced. Now, you belong only to yourself. And while they try to rewrite the past, you embrace the present and build a future where they no longer exist. They wonder if they will ever get over it. But you don't even remember they exist. And then you smile. Not because you won, but because you realized there was never a battle. Your mere existence was already your victory. And while they drown in what they lost, you rise without ever looking back. Because now your destiny is far greater than anything they could have imagined. And if you think that was the worst of it, wait until you see what happens in the end. Time has passed. They tried to move on, tried to fill the void, convinced themselves that your absence made no difference. But life has a cruel way of exposing the truth. The same ones who once laughed at you now find themselves lost. The same people who mocked your pain are now consumed by their own emptiness. They believed they could replace you, but every new attempt only reinforced the reality they were trying to avoid. The chosen one has no substitute. The connections are shallow. The words are empty. The energy around them has never been the same. They surround themselves with distractions, dive into superficial relationships, seek anything that might make them forget. But at the end of the day, the silence screams louder. At first, they denied it, laughed, saying you were overreacting. But then something began to change. Things stopped working out for them. Small problems that once seemed insignificant started to grow. And without realizing it, they became exactly what they once accused you of being. Empty, broken people, trying to pretend nothing happened. The relationships that once seemed solid now feel fragile. The bonds that appeared unbreakable are now tested under the weight of absence. They form new friendships, but nothing compares to your presence. They search for distractions, but everything feels forced. What once seemed natural now feels empty. And then the signs begin to appear. The conversations are dull, the smiles are mechanical, the light in their eyes has faded, and the more they try to ignore it, the more suffocating the truth becomes. They try to convince themselves that they are fine, but something haunts them every day. The feeling that something essential has been ripped away and will never be recovered. The weight of regret begins to crush them, and suddenly they realize, without the chosen one, everything fell apart. The stability they always took for granted is gone. The harmony they thought they controlled has turned to chaos. They never noticed before, but now it's clear. You were the one holding everything together. And now, without you, everything is falling apart. The days feel too long, the nights too empty. The absence of the chosen one weighs heavier with each passing day. In desperation, they try to find something to make them feel alive again, but nothing fills the void that was left behind. Time hasn't brought relief. On the contrary, each new day only reinforces the truth. They destroyed the only thing that kept them standing. Now they try to cling to the past. They relive moments, search for signs, attempt to recreate what was lost, but all they find are shadows. Memories of what was once real, but is now gone forever. They can pretend they have moved on, but deep down, they know the truth. They live trapped in a past that will never be rewritten. Time moves forward. The world keeps turning, but for them, everything remains the same. And then, they finally understand. It was never the chosen one who disappeared. It was them, lost forever in the emptiness they created. And if you think this was the end, wait until you see what happens next. They don't know how to move on. Each day without you is a reminder of what they lost. They try to act like nothing has changed, as if life has continued as normal. But inside them, the emptiness grows. Because while they sink into regret, you have become untouchable. You are not just distant, you have become something they will never be. And that destroys them. They try to move forward. They seek new friendships, new relationships, new distractions. But everything feels superficial. Nothing has depth. Because the problem was never just the absence of someone. The problem was the loss of the chosen one. And that cannot be replaced. They stalk your social media, searching for any sign that you still feel something. But they find nothing. Your posts are about growth, evolution, new achievements. You shine, you move forward, you become stronger. And them? They remain stuck in the same cycle, reliving the past, unable to break free. What once felt like a game they controlled is now a nightmare they cannot escape. Because every new attempt to move on without you only reinforces what they try to deny. They destroyed the only thing that made them feel complete. Every photo of you, every success, every milestone is like an open wound that never heals. They watch, searching for signs of weakness, hoping for proof that you still feel something, but all they find is someone who keeps rising. You don't talk about the past. You don't mention names. You don't feel nostalgia. And that kills them inside. Because the truth is brutal. The chosen one feels nothing for them anymore. And there is no worse punishment than being forgotten by someone you will never forget. They try to convince themselves that one day you will return, that maybe a reunion will happen. But deep down, they know the chosen one never comes back. And then the final blow. The truth hits them like a shock. The chosen one has become untouchable. And there is no greater pain than watching someone move on without you and realizing you were never truly needed. And if you think that was the worst, wait until you see what happens next. They never imagined you would truly move on. Deep down, they believed you would return one day. That time would bring you back. That memories would make you miss them. But time passed and you never returned. On the contrary, you built something far greater. While they drown in the past, trapped in cycles that never change, you broke free. And the most shocking part? You have never been this happy. They watch from a distance, trying to understand how you did it. They search for signs that there is still a piece of the past in you, but there isn't. The chosen one was reborn, and that destroys them, because now it's clear. You no longer need them, but they have never needed you more. They try to move on. They pretend nothing has changed. They post pictures smiling. They create new connections. They try to build something new, but something is off. Everything feels fake. Because the truth is, even surrounded by people, they feel lonelier than ever. And then comes the envy. They watch from afar, trying to find flaws, waiting for a sign that you still feel something. But the more they look, the more they see that you are better than ever. They try to convince themselves that you are just pretending. That behind the smiles and achievements, there is an emptiness, a longing, a regret. But there isn't, and that destroys them. Because if they once believed you would return one day, now they know the truth. You will never return. Now you have peace. Your days are no longer filled with guilt, fear, or worry. You have built a strong circle, free from manipulation. Every new accomplishment proves that you not only moved on, you are living the life you always deserved. No chains, no fear, no regrets. And those who stayed behind, they try to ignore it, pretend they have moved on. But every little memory destroys them. They will never be the same after losing the chosen one. They replay old conversations, look at pictures, try to hold on to the past, but all they find are echoes of something that will never return. And then they finally realize the chosen one was always the beginning of something greater. But for those left behind, he has become just a distant memory. Now they look in the mirror and see what they always ignored. They never valued you. And now, nothing can change that. Remember what I told you at the beginning? They drained everything from you. But now, without you, they are destroyed. And if you think this was the end, wait until you see what happens next. They believed they owned you, that you belonged to them, that, somehow, your fate was tied to theirs. But now, for the first time, they see the truth they always ignored. You were never theirs. You were free all along. They were the ones who were trapped trapped in their illusions, in their manipulations, in their desperate attempts to keep you small. They built a game where they believed they had control, but in the end, they were the ones who lost. Now, they must learn to live without you. And you? You never look back. Their time is over. Yours is only beginning. But there is something even deeper in this story. You spent so much time believing you needed to be accepted, that you needed to prove something, that somehow your worth depended on their approval. But now you understand. The Chosen One was never a piece in their game. He was always the entire board. They just made you believe you were small, because as long as you didn't know who you truly were, they could control you. But that time is over. You have awakened. And now, they don't know what to do. They wait for the day you will look back, for the day you will feel nostalgia, for the day you will regret and try to return. But that will never happen, because the Chosen One carries no hatred, no revenge. He simply moves forward, and that is the greatest punishment of all. Now they wonder, how did someone we underestimated become untouchable? But it's too late. You are no longer the same. You have become what they feared the most, a Chosen One who recognizes his own strength. Now the game is over. The control they thought they had over you has dissolved, and for the first time, they realize you were never theirs. You never needed them. And now without you, they will never be the same again. If this truth resonated with you, comment 77 below to seal your new journey as a Chosen One.